Okay, we're recording. So last week, this is week 4, and I was telling Marcia, we're gonna finish our crash course today. In the future, maybe I boil this down to 3 weeks, but this time certainly has taken us a full 4 weeks, 4 classes. So we're going to discuss, we're going to finish our history, like the chain of history we've been discussing. We're going to brush up on the Cold War, talk a little more about the Cold War, where it puts us today. And then that'll lead us nicely into a talk about economics. We'll talk about capitalism and communism and go right into economics. Then we'll talk about some geography, and maybe tie the geography back to the history and the government and civic stuff. Okay, so we'll be done. As always, if you have any questions, if there's something you're curious about, we've got plenty of time here. So we can just jump in. So do you see my Cold War cartoon from last week? Is that on the screen?
I see it.
Okay. Okay, let me get this. Okay. Well, as we discussed last week, this is President John Kennedy, JFK, in the 60s, and a Russian president, could be Gorbachev. We analyze this cartoon, and being ready to analyze a political cartoon is good. And so, you got to look, if there's a title, you see what the title is. I don't have a title on here. But you look at what's happening. You see both their fingers are both on a button. The buttons are H bombs, maybe hydrogen bombs. That was, historically speaking, that was something called MAD. And maybe, if you ever do any reading about this history, MAD, M-A-D, Mutual Assured Destruction. And, it also serves as mad, like it was a mad idea. It was crazy. The idea was that as soon as, if President Kennedy heard, and it's reflected in this cartoon, if President Kennedy finds out from his generals that the Soviets in the Cold War, Soviet Russia, if the Soviets had launched their nuclear missiles, we would immediately launch our nuclear missiles. And of course, it only takes a few minutes for a nuclear warhead to travel across the world. So within a few minutes, the Russian warheads would be coming our way, our nuclear missiles would be going their way. And it was called mutually assured destruction. Mutual, both sides, assured destruction. Basically, and we're going to look at a chart in a minute, there was enough nuclear warheads on Earth to basically blow up the planet. And so the idea was mutually assured destruction. If we find out that you've launched your missiles, you better believe that we're launching our missiles too. So it was a Cold War. Nobody ever launched the missiles, although there was 1 or 2 super close events, and there was a few accidents, some really scary moments in Cold War history. But ultimately, it was a Cold War. It wasn't a hot war. It wasn't a shooting war. Okay, as we discussed last week, it was a war of ideas, not bullets. It was a war between the capitalist countries in the United States' sphere of influence, our allies, and the Warsaw Pact, which was the treaty that formed the Soviet Union. And of course, all their allies here are red and pink. Okay, so there's these 2 parts of the world, really, fighting wars. And we talked about last week, there were wars within the Cold War. The Soviet, or what am I thinking? Vietnam War, the Korean War, those were smaller, they were bigger wars, but they were fought about communism. America wanted to prevent the spread of communism around the globe. But those aren't the Cold War. They're part of the Cold War era, but they're not the Cold War. Okay. Okay, so this is a famous cartoon. I like this cartoon. You see it sometimes in like high school history classrooms, and there's a few different. There's one that's more cartoony. There's a nice poster of different ideologies, or in this case, economic ways of thinking that, and they use it with cows. Okay, it all starts with you have 2 cows, and in different ideologies, different government types, or different economic ideologies, you have 2 cows. They always start with you have 2 cows, and then something happens. Okay, so super generalized, super boiled down to a childish simplification. But in capitalism, well, what is let's ask this before we talk about these cows. What, in capitalism, we live in a capitalist society, a capitalist economy. What is the driving force in capitalism?
Money.
Money. The assumption that you will make decisions that get you money, and I will make decisions that get me money, or things that I want, right? When you have something that, and we're going to talk about supply and demand in a little while, when you have something that costs $10 and I want that thing more than I want my $10, I'll trade you and I'll give you the $10 and then you'll give me that thing. Okay, and I'm making a rational decision. I'm making my own decision. You're making your own decision. We're both making decisions that give us what we want, whether it's money or the things. Okay, and we're both free to do that. So we live in a capitalist economy. In communism, the state, the government, and when we say state, we don't mean like Pennsylvania, we mean generally state means like the nation, the government. The state controls things, okay? And in a true communist society, the state controls things very strictly. So here's a super simplification. In traditional capitalism, you have 2 cows. You sell 1 cow and buy a bull. What happens then? What does that mean?
They get to have babies.
Yeah, they're going to reproduce, and you're going to, as if you're in the cow business, you're going to have more cows. So that's great. It says your herd multiplies and the economy grows. You sell them and retire on the income. Okay, I would guess the person who made this poster was pro-capitalism, because that sounds good. You have the freedom to make that decision. You sell 1 cow, buy a bull, your herd multiplies, the economy grows. Okay, in communism, you have 2 cows. The state takes them both and gives you some milk. So the state makes all the decisions. It's not you and me deciding, well, do I want the milk? Do I want to sell the cow? What do I want? The state is deciding, well, you need milk and we're going to give you this much milk every month and this is how much it's going to cost you. And you go to work someplace else. You're going to work at the shoe factory, but we're going to give you the milk that we decide that you need. Okay, in a true communist society, all the decisions are made. They're not made by the market. Okay, and we'll talk about that when we talk about economics. Okay, so that's the super simplification. Capitalism versus communism. Okay, now let's see if I can use the drawing tool, the annotate. Do you have, okay, at the top of your screen in Zoom, when you go to the top and you see all the little buttons, do you have an annotate button with a pen? I think you should. Do you guys have that?
What is it called?
At the top with all the buttons, do you have an annotate button?
Not that I see.
Okay. Well, like up above, Tusajigwe, looks like you do. Let me see, Marcia. Can you are you on a laptop, Marcia?
Yeah.
Okay. Put your cursor up at the top. Now mine's going to look a little different than yours, but there should be like the mute button up at the top and maybe like the video button, start a video. And
mine has the bottom.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's at the bottom. But yeah, is there an annotate button with a pen?
No. Let's see if it's in my more. No.
Okay. Jendai, do you have the annotate?
The annotate.
Yeah, annotate just means to like mark up something, to edit something.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Let me
Although it could be, yeah, it could be in a drop down somewhere in the Zoom.
Um, Where do I?
Yeah, it says in view options.
In view options, okay.
Yeah, look there, Marcia, in view options.
So where do I go?
I just have fit to window, original size, or request remote control.
Oh, I thought.
I have.
Well, yeah. See, I don't know exactly what you're. Okay, the top of the
Okay.
screen, view
So
options, and annotate. Well, if you have it, if you don't, that's okay. And I'm not super familiar with Zoom anyway. But if you have it, go ahead, click on that, and that'll give you like a pen. And with your, if you have a mouse or if you're just using a touchpad on a laptop, you can click and draw. So you'll be able to pick a color. So here's what we're going to do. On the screen, I have a list of things down the bottom. It says, decide if the following thing is capitalism or communism. Use the drawing tool, the annotate tool, to mark each item as blue or red. Now, Marcia, if you don't, then that's okay. Just think about these, and then we'll talk through them anyway. So if you can mark them, if it works, then put just underline on that list, or put a little check mark or a circle. Mark them blue for capitalism and red for communism.
okay.
And some are capitalist, some are communist. Okay. Everybody have a chance to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's talk through it then. Okay. So are these features of capitalism or communism? Private ownership. We marked it blue for capitalism. That is capitalism. Okay. Private ownership. If I buy a shoe factory and then run that shoe factory and I make all the decisions, I own that. Okay. In communism, now there's a way to have economies that have features of different things. But if we're talking pure communism, pure capitalism, in communism, there's no private ownership. Right? The government owns your house and the government owns everything, and they give it to you. Or they make you buy it, but truly, like, you don't have private ownership.
Would you hold on, would you keep
Say that again?
I'm sorry, would you keep this up? I'm gonna write some things down with this, okay?
Yeah, sure. Income redistribution. We underline that as red. That is communism. Okay, in a truly communist society, there are no rich people and poor people. Everybody's the same. And ideally, the purpose of communism is those people think it's the best way, because there's no rich people and poor people. Your needs will be met. Your needs are met by the communist government. They think they're going to do a good job. That's why they do it. They're going to do a good job of taking care of everyone's needs. So they there's no, doctors don't make 10 times more than a teacher. Everybody has a job in society. They do that job. They get paid, and they get what they need, ideally. Okay, which leads us to the next thing, a classless society. There's no upper class, middle class, lower class. Competitive markets is capitalism. Competitive markets. If I open a shoe factory and you open a shoe factory and people like my shoes more than yours, I'm going to thrive and you're going to go out of business. It's a competitive market. Okay, that's capitalism. Communism, state ownership of all property. We talked about that. And capitalism is profit seeking. Okay.
Now, I think I understand that. Now, I'm just writing some things down before you go to the next thing, okay?
Sure. Now, we live in a capitalist society. We have a capitalist economy, but I forget there's a term for it, but it's a controlled capitalist society. So, like, our healthcare is very controlled. There are limitations. There's capitalism, and it's it's whatever the market will bear, and we'll talk about economics in a little while. But the government does have some control. Okay, they could charge $1 million for open heart surgery, but instead of doing that, the government says, hey, you can't charge $1 million for open heart surgery. You got to make it affordable. And of course, healthcare is all this other crazy stuff that nobody understands. But, just because you could charge $1 million because people want open heart surgery when they need it, doesn't mean that you should. And so the government controls some things. Okay. Amazon, Google, these companies are extremely powerful. They control a lot of our lives, but the government controls them a little bit, because if you just let Google do whatever it wants, then it would be bad. It would be a risk of some bad things happening. So the government, we live in a capitalist society, but the government does control things. Okay. Are we ready to move on? I'll share all this later.
Hold on, wait before you do.
Okay.
Okay, now you can move on.
Okay, now let me see if I can erase. Well, see, I was afraid of that. So we got these marks on the screen. How do I get rid of these? Oh, clear. There we go. I got it. Okay. All right, we got it. Now I don't want to annotate anymore. All right, very good. Got it. Okay, here we go. Part of the Cold War was nuclear proliferation and nuclear disarmament. Okay, to proliferate means to expand, to get more of. So we have a graph here. Now, it's always good to understand graphs and be able to read those things. So across the bottom, we have years. This is the Cold War, 1945. 1945 was when we dropped the first atomic bombs. The world found out that America had the atomic bombs in 1945 to end World War II. Goes through the Cold War and goes up to 2020. The title, should have read that first, is Estimated Global Nuclear Warhead Inventories, 1945 to 2020. And across the y-axis upwards, 10,000 up to 80,000. That's the number of nuclear warheads globally. So let me ask you this: what year, estimate, did the global stockpile, the global amount of nuclear warheads peak? Yeah, 85, 86, I don't know. Okay, so yeah, right around that, yeah, maybe 1985. Okay, which is towards the end of the Cold War. So look at, say, 1945 to really the breakup of the Soviet Union, which we're going to look at in a second, was in 1991. So that goes right up to there. Okay. You see the American stockpile in blue, the Russian stockpile in red. And at the bottom, there are a handful, even today, there's a handful of other countries with nuclear capabilities: China, France, India. It's a very small club.
Did you say, so you said the Soviet Union started in 1941?
Yeah, well, the Warsaw Pact started it. I think that was at the end of World War II. So I think 1945, I'm not sure when the Soviet
That,
Union started.
so that's when the Cold War started, and that's also when the Soviet Union started?
Yeah, yeah, because at the end of every big war, there's like a reshuffling of things. At the end of World War II, or at the end of World War I, at the end of World War II, they'd sign these treaties that end the war, and they kind of shake things up a little bit. The winning countries do better and sometimes punish the losing countries. That's why Germany got so stuck after World War I that they were so angry that it led into World War II. The Germans were so basically beat up after World War I that the German people were really angry, and so Hitler took advantage of that anger and took them right into World War II. So yeah, after World War II, they reshuffle things. The Soviets, the Russians signed a Warsaw Pact, which sucked a bunch of these other little countries in, and they formed USSR, the Soviet Union. Okay, and so they very quickly after World War II, they also invented essentially, because nobody shares this information. Every country is inventing its own nuclear powers, and so their stockpile goes up about that same year, 1985. What do you think happens? Now, that peak of the Soviet Russian stockpile, let's say that's the same year as the global stockpile. Why do you think, okay, everything to the left is nuclear proliferation going upwards, and everything to the right of that peak is nuclear disarmament. So why do you think it peaks? What happens? Because they never did shoot off all the missiles and blow us all to smithereens. So what happens, do you think, that it peaks and starts to go down? Do you think all the leaders of those countries said, whoa, wait a second, this is crazy. I'm going to just, even though nobody asked me to, we're going to get rid of our nuclear weapons. Do you think leaders are likely to voluntarily get rid of all their nuclear weapons? Now, I don't know the exact details, but I think it was 1985, 86, something, I forget what, something was signed, some treaty, a nuclear disarmament plan treaty was made that said, okay, somebody stepped forward and said, this is nuts. We could blow up Earth with the number of nuclear warheads we have. Even if I'm trying to scare you and you're trying to scare me, this is just crazy. So we're going to all agree to disarm, to lower our stockpiles. There's still plenty. So how many, read the graph. How many today, how many nuclear warheads do you think there are globally?
Couple hundred.
Well, it looks like between 10,000 and 20,000, if you look on the right-hand side, globally. Okay, and America and the Soviet, well, now Russia, have a few thousand, much less than 10,000. Can't really see that last line. So nuclear disarmament did happen, which is a good thing. Sure, we want to always be more powerful than our enemies, and you gotta, that guy with the biggest muscles, nobody's going to mess with him. So if we have a giant stockpile of nuclear warheads, nobody's going to mess with us because maybe we'll use them against them. But I think the world came together in 1985 and said, whoa, 70,000 nuclear warheads is unnecessary. So they all agreed, and today it's still in effect. Okay. So that's nuclear proliferation, nuclear disarmament. Now, there were moments where it looked like there was going to be a war. It looked like they were going to fire off the missiles, but it didn't come to that. There was also a couple of accidents where I think a plane carrying a nuclear bomb was flying over like North or South Carolina, just transporting, and they accidentally dropped it, but it wasn't like the nuclear part wasn't armed. So there was that was one close call. Now that didn't show up in the newspaper at the time. It was found out about later. So there were some close calls during the Cold War, but it never did come to that, that moment here with the leaders pushing their buttons and firing all their missiles. Okay. So 1991, you have the breakup of the Soviet Union. Basically, the capital or the communist economy wasn't working. And most everybody would agree that, yeah, communism isn't the greatest system. Capitalism is better. People are better cared for in a capitalist economy. And so communism just started to break up. You have some Soviet leaders then who kind of looked and said, hey, you know what? Those capitalists, they have nice stuff, and they seem happy, and their people seem well fed and healthy and happy. So we're going to start to, Russia started to introduce some features of capitalism. They sort of started to drift away from communism and towards capitalism a little bit. And they let it happen, and the leaders let it happen. Then you have some what they call peaceful revolutions in what they called the satellite states. Okay, you have Russia on the map, and then these little, now different colors, are the satellite states. They were part of the Soviet Union, but then throughout the 80s and 1991, they broke up and said they revolted and became their own countries. And so today, these are all countries. Okay, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Ukraine, and some other.
And now I'm sorry, now you can see where I was born, Belarus. That's my country where I was born. Hi.
Hi, Nadia, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And I grew up in Crimea. You can see between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, a peninsula in the Black Sea. It's Crimea. It used to belong to Ukraine, and actually, who knows?
Right.
But Russia now just took it to itself. So I grew up there.
Yeah. Nadia, thanks for logging in. So yeah, you have around that time, 80s, early 1990s, 91, you have the breakup, as the map says, the breakup of the Soviet Union. They became their own countries. We still now have the country of Russia, which was always the largest and most influential. That's with the capital city of Moscow. And they're still a big player on the world stage today. We talk about Russia all the time and their leader, Vladimir Putin, and Moscow. But it's not the Soviet Union as it was. So when you hear about Russia today in the news, it's a history, it's a relationship that goes back a long ways through the Cold War. Okay, but 1991, you see the end of what we call the Cold War era. Okay. All right, now let's use that to jump into economics. We talked about capitalism plenty and communism. Now let's talk about capitalist economics. The number one thing is supply and demand. And if you're, when you touch on economics and you want to be ready for that test, you got to know about supply and demand. Jendaya, could you read that paragraph?
Okay. The law of demand says that at higher prices, buyers will demand less of an economic good. The law of supply says that at higher prices, sellers will supply more of an economic good. These two laws interact to determine the actual market prices and volume of goods that are traded on the market.
Okay, thank you. So there's a couple of good economics words in there. An economic good doesn't mean like good or bad. An economic good means you go to the store and buy goods, right? Goods is just a thing. You know, anything from the grocery store or the shoes at my factory, those are all goods. Okay, so you buy goods. The market doesn't mean you go to the market and buy, you know, apples or whatever. The market is the whole system of people buying and selling things. Okay, the market will do its own thing because you make decisions and I make decisions and millions of other people are making their own decisions to buy things or not buy things or buy something different. And so that is the market. Okay, if I make shoes in my factory and they're selling a lot, then I can say the market wants these shoes. You know, these are good shoes. The market is responding well. Or if I'm not selling, or if I sell fewer this month than I did last month, you'd say, well, the market doesn't want these shoes anymore. Okay, so the market is just like the whole system of everything together. Okay. So the laws of supply and the law of demand. The law of demand says that at higher prices, buyers will demand less of an economic good. If you have two, let's say, equal things, or let's say, okay, you want to go buy, what do we want to buy? Somebody tell me something. What's our example?
Food?
Okay, let's say, like what? What do we, you tell me. What kind of food do we want?
Meat.
Okay, meat. Okay, so produce. That's good because the price changes all the time. Let's say just regular hamburger meat. You want to buy, 2 pounds of hamburger meat. You go to 2 grocery stores. At one grocery store, it's $1.50 a pound. And at another grocery store, the same meat, the same quality meat is $2 a pound. The demand will be higher for the $1.50 a pound than for the $2 a pound meat. The higher the price, the lower the demand. Okay, maybe 20 people go in and buy the cheaper stuff and only 10 people go into the other store and buy the more expensive stuff. Or maybe people go into that store where it costs $2 and the price, or it costs $3 or $5 per pound, and people are going to say, well, you know what, I guess I don't need hamburger meat today. I'll buy something else. I'll buy a box of cereal. So the demand is lower. At higher prices, the demand is lower. The law of supply says that at higher prices, sellers will supply more of an economic good. So demand looks at things from the buyer's perspective. The law of supply looks at things from the manufacturer's or the supplier's perspective. Okay, if people are going to buy meat at $2 a pound when it's cheaper somewhere else, I'm going to sell as much meat for $2 a pound as I can. I'm going to keep that shelf full of meat so that people will keep buying it and I'll keep making money. I'm not going to let that shelf in my store go empty. Okay, so the laws of supply and demand. These two laws interact, go up and down to determine the actual market prices and volumes of goods that are traded on a market. So let's look at it visually. Here is the classic graph of supply and demand. D is demand, S is supply. Okay, the x-axis of quantity, the amount of something sold, goes from low on the left, the arrow, follow the arrow, higher to the right, and the price goes from the bottom to the top. Okay. So let's say, the price of meat. Let's say I sell meat and today it's $2 a pound. And let's say, let's follow this supply line. It goes upwards to the right. Okay. So as price goes up, let's say today it's $2 a pound. Tomorrow it's $2.50, $2.75, $3. By next week it's $5. As my price goes up, I'm probably, let's say, going to sell less and less meat at my grocery store. Demand will go down. So as price goes up, demand will go down. And so, or let's say I have a grocery store, and there's a grocery store next door. If I have 10 bundles of meat on my shelf, but next door they've got 100 bundles of meat on their shelf, okay, I might be able to charge more for people that walk into my store because I have a lower supply. So as supply goes lower, I can charge more. Okay, let's look at some things. A super common thing like bread. There's tons of bread out there. Okay, although this year I think it was all a wake-up call to all of us if you went into the grocery store in March and April, and there was empty shelves in the grocery store. That was scary. That was not cool. But under normal circumstances, there's plenty of bread for all of us, right? It's just there's different types of bread and whatever. But let's just say there's one type of bread. As the supply goes up, there's a meeting point. Okay, so we have this point in the middle. That's the market price. If I put a ton of bread on my shelf and everybody comes into the store and says, "Oh, there's tons of bread," I'm not. Why would I pay a lot of money? Why would I pay $5 for a loaf of bread when there's tons of bread here, right? So if supply is up, the price isn't going to be that much. Now, if I only have 10 loaves of bread every week, then I can charge a lot more money because people are going to come in and say, "Well, yeah, I really do want bread, so I'll pay $10 for a loaf of bread because there's not that much on the shelf." So there is a meeting point where these two lines meet that tells me as the grocery store, this is the right price. People will, if I supply this much on my shelf, this is the price that they will pay. So quantity and price you find a meeting point. Now I have a baseball card. This is a Mickey Mantle. I think this is Mickey Mantle's rookie card for the Yankees. I don't know what year. I'm not a baseball card guy, but baseball cards are super, this is a super rare baseball card. So you might say, well, demand isn't going to be very high. I have no interest in buying that baseball card. I wouldn't pay very much money for it because I'm not interested. But for the people that are interested, so I'm not part of that market. I'm not buying baseball cards. So you can count me out. I'm not part of the market. But for people who buy baseball cards, they are the market. And so demand would be very high for a Mickey Mantle Yankees rookie baseball card. Demand is very high. So you could charge a lot of money, and people do. If you wanted to sell that card, there's a lot of demand. A lot of different people would pay money for that card. And so you could charge thousands of dollars for somebody to buy your baseball card. Okay. You might say, well, demand's not high. I don't care about baseball cards, but you're not part of that market. I'm not part of that market. The people who would buy, who are looking at baseball cards, they are that market. Okay, so the laws of supply and demand. As price goes up, as you charge more, demand is going to go down. If you charge less, demand is going to go up. People are more happy to buy cheap things than expensive things. Okay, so that's supply and demand. Okay, another thing, now this is a little bit jumping around. Another thing to know about, and this is a connection between economics and history, and I think this is interesting, is called the Columbian Exchange. Has anybody ever heard of the Columbian Exchange before?
Yeah, we did.
No.
We heard it.
Yeah. So Jendai, what do you without looking at the screen, how would you describe what is the Columbian Exchange?
Well, I can't explain it, but we heard about Christopher Columbus and some things that he did in the city when he came to America.
Right. Yeah, it's named after Christopher Columbus. Okay, so on the screen I have 1492 is the year that Christopher Columbus arrives in the Americas. People say he discovered America, discovered North America. He didn't discover it. There was already a million people living here. Okay, so in my opinion, that's not discovery. He arrived. And so then it says through the 1500s, people we call conquistadors, conquerors, and I think is the rough translation, conquistadors, and there was probably a dozen so famous conquistadors from Spain, Portugal, and other European countries, explored the Americas and conquered, really, the native civilizations and started our history today. You know, the Europeans in North America. That's how they came. That led to in the 1600s, early 1600s, that led to the English pilgrims arriving in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It led to the English settlers settling in Jamestown, Virginia, and away we go with American history. Nadia, could you read this paragraph, the Columbian Exchange?
The Columbian Exchange, named after Christopher Columbus, was the widespread transfer of plants, animals, culture, human populations, technology, diseases, and ideas between the Americas, West Africa, and the Old World in the 15th. How do you pronounce this?
In the
1500?
1500s.
Thank you, 1500 through 1700. It also relates to European colonization and trade following Christopher Columbus's in 1492 voyage. Invasive species, including communicable diseases, were byproduct of the exchange. The changes in agriculture significantly altered global population. The most significant immediate impact of the Columbian Exchange was the cultural exchanges and the transfer of people, both free and enslaved, between continents.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, the Columbian Exchange is named after Christopher Columbus. It's just the exchange of goods and ideas and, what does it say? The widespread transfer of plants, animals, culture, human populations, technology, diseases, and ideas between what they call the Old World and the New World, the European and Africa and Asia, and the newly, quote unquote, discovered, realized by the Europeans, the Americas, North and South America. Okay, so everybody who always talks about the Columbian Exchange looks at some sort of graphic like this. Okay, we've got the New World on the left and the Old World on the right, and you got arrows, and these are all the things that were, the world suddenly is connected by all these explorers. The two halves of the world really are now suddenly connected. You always had Europe and Africa and Asia. They've always been geographically connected, so those people could come and go and trade, but they didn't even know that the Americas were over there across the Atlantic Ocean. So now suddenly you're sailing ships back and forth all the time, and all this stuff is getting traded. So all these things come from the Americas. Okay, what do we got? We got pumpkins, turkey, tobacco. The world, love it or leave it. At the time they used a lot of tobacco. Peppers, potatoes, peanuts, corn, vanilla. All these things are from, they're plants and animals, plants mainly, that lived in the Americas, did not live in the Old World. And then we have things that lived in, naturally grew and plants and animals from the Old World, from Europe and Africa and Asia, that it then come on these sailing ships and are introduced into the New World, the Americas. We have coffee, olives. Olives are big in European cuisine today. and and we eat them all the time everywhere around the world. Bananas, sugarcane, and all these livestock, cattle, sheep, pigs, horse, those were all domesticated in Africa, Asia, and Europe. But I mean, look at the tomatoes were an American thing, but now when you think of Italian food, you're thinking of tomatoes. Imagine Italian food if they hadn't brought over the tomato from the Americas. And of course, the real big thing, that's all well and good, and the food and the world gets more interesting when you trade all the food all around, but also the diseases, smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria. The Europeans brought these European diseases to the Americas that the Native Americans were not immune to. So if you expose a European to, say, smallpox is pretty deadly, and maybe 10% of Europeans die from smallpox. If you introduce smallpox to the Americas, where it hasn't been before, none of those people have any immunity to it, and so you have 90% of the Native American population in some areas. 90%, sometimes whole towns die of these diseases. Okay, so the diseases are the big part of the Columbian Exchange. They really do change history. Okay, so the Columbian Exchange, you could look at a graphic like this and they could say, in what way did this change the world, or, that sort of stuff. But goods and ideas and technology, the Native Americans didn't have guns, but then when you bring the guns over, suddenly they have guns and they can start to invent things and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the Columbian Exchange. Let's look at geography. Okay, couple of maps. This is nothing amazing. One thing that I was looking at a list of topics to cover for the GED test, the HiSET test. One thing they said, immigration and migration. So I pulled up a map. This is from the United Nations. I don't know exactly when this information is from, but this is just, at the bottom it says main migration routes. So this is global migration routes. And these are things we're familiar with. People are migrating from South America through Central America up into North America. People are migrating, and now that's something we hear about. We hear about, the southern border and people from Mexico. We hear about these things on the news. And it all becomes politicized as well. But there's migrants around the world, and so this is showing some of those patterns. Okay, what do you call a person who is, if somebody just is moving because they want to get a better job, that's just an immigrant. That's a person who's migrating. People do it all the time. What do you call somebody who's fleeing their country because their country is falling apart? It's not safe. Maybe there's been a revolution. Maybe they're
A refugee.
a refugee. Okay, so a person who's fleeing for safety is a refugee. And so here's the global map. And so you could come up with a bunch of good questions about looking at these arrows, describing this migration pattern. Okay, down southwards from Asia, westwards from Asia, northwards from Africa. Okay, so to be able to read a map like this is important. Okay, lastly, let's take it till noon here. Let's talk about urbanization and population density. Really after the Civil War. Civil War was 1861, 1865. So the second half of the 1800s, you have urbanization. Okay, factories start to be a much bigger part of American life than farms. So farms are going out of business, and farms fail, and so somebody says, well, we need a job. My family needs a job. It looks like we're moving to the city. So you find the nearest city, you move to the city, you get a job in a factory, you get a job doing something in a city. Urbanization is the idea of people migrating through capitalistic choices to move to cities, generally because Well, because they can form a better life, get a job that they lost a job, they need a new job. Maybe they, today people want to live in cities. There's vibrant city life and all that stuff. But here's a map. On the left-hand side, this is population per square mile, and it goes from green, less than 1 person per square mile, to the bright red is more than, it's a more than sign, more than 5,000 people per square mile. Now let me ask you this. Is the majority of American land cities, or is it urban or rural, the majority of America?
I think it's the cities people who live in the cities.
Well, let me ask, looking at the map on the left-hand side, is the majority of American land
If
urban?
you're talking about land, no, it's
Right.
not the cities.
I would say half.
Yeah, if you go by the, the yellowish, the red to yellow, it depends on if you're talking about just the red or the yellow, yeah. But yeah, you can see, that map, and you could come up with some great questions. Where are the cities? The cities tend to be around the coasts, okay? And that tends to be true around the world. People need water. Historically, you look back at where all the civilizations have started, and it's always on rivers or on the coast. People need water, right? So even today, there's lots of big cities inside, in the interior of the country, but the coasts tend to be where the population is. Now, if you look on the right-hand side, it's population per square mile, same thing, but now you take it state by state. And now look, compare the left hand to the right hand map. You have California, a couple of very large cities in California, makes California on the right hand side very dark green. You look in the Northeast, you have Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, okay, that whole corridor, they call the corridor of Northeast population. That take all those people in the cities and the people in those states not living in cities, you average it out for the whole state, and look on the right-hand side, you have very dark. The darkest is New Jersey, Rhode Island. New York is not, but that's because you take New York and it's New York City and the whole state. And so when you average it out, it's not quite as dark. Okay. So you could come up with some pretty good questions about comparing these cities on the left-hand side with the states on the right-hand side. Same information. It's population per square mile, but are you talking about, on a very small scale on the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side, you're talking about the whole states? Either way, you can see that the West is pretty empty. Montana, even Colorado, what is this, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho. There's not really any big cities. And so on the right-hand side, you average it out over those whole states, and it's very few people. Okay, so that's urbanization, population density. Here's a fact, I think we touched on it in the past. Okay, so this is from the Washington Post. Actually, it was a study done in 2016, and then I found an article in the Washington Post. A 2016 study of urbanization patterns showed that by the year 2040, just 20 years from now, 70% of Americans will live in just 15 states. 50% of Americans will live in just 8 states. This means that the other 50% of Americans will be spread throughout 42 states. Okay, now I'll share this later. I promise I will this time. I haven't been doing the greatest this session about sending out my emails, but I'll share this later. You can click on this link. But here's a map from that article. Okay, now, got to be comfortable looking at maps. Population distribution by 2040. The darkest blue are the states making up half the population. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Presumably, if we look back on this, that's where all the cities are. Okay, California, Texas, Pennsylvania, New York. What else is it? Pennsylvania, New York, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Illinois. That's where the cities are. Okay, the biggest cities. Half of the country, population-wise, will live in 8 states. The light blue is the next 20%. So now we're talking 70% of the country is going to live in blue, and just 30% of the country's population will be in the gray states. As we see from the population density, a lot of green, not a lot of red and yellow cities in some of these areas. Okay, so geography matters. Where people choose to live is going to matter. So let's think, why would this be a concern for some people looking forward in America's history? There's really one problem that people would see with that this is a change for America, and something, something may happen. Think of the Constitution. How's that going to change America when you have half the country living in just 8 states?
Because those states get to make the majority of choices.
Yeah, think about the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay, now there's a lot of details here, and if you're interested, you can read that article. And actually, yeah, it's pretty interesting. Now, a lot of this is speculation, and you never know how things are going to play out. But in the House of Representatives, it's represented by population. So those 8 states are going to have big presence in, big groups of representatives in the House of Representatives. The Senate, how is representation done in the Senate? How many senators does every state get?
Thought it was 1.
No, it's not 1. Every state gets 2 senators, right? So there's 100 senators for 50 states, which means in the Senate, half the country, if that half the country likes a new law, there's only 16 senators that would support it, right? So half the country is being represented by 16 senators. The other half the country is being represented by 84 senators. Okay, that could be, looking forward, that could be problematic for how, for our representative government. We want the majority rules. If the majority of Americans thinks something's a good idea, if it's constitutional and everything, if it is a good idea, then that should become law. But we're going to have 50% of the country represented by just 16% of the senators. Now, the House of Representatives is different because it's population. So you're going to have the House of Representatives and the Senate working very differently. So it could be interesting. And you notice Pennsylvania is one of those 8 states, right? Mainly because of our cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And so we will be in the half of this nation whose population is represented in just 8 out of 50 states. Could be a problem, as that shift starts to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen very slowly, right? This is 20 years from now they're talking. And maybe it doesn't happen at all. It's just, it's just a pattern and a prediction. But as that happens, maybe we have to change something in order to make sure that everything's fair, I don't know. I've heard that several different places, and I just think it's a really interesting statistic. Geography, it's, geography matters. So as we prepare for the GED test and the HiSET test, it's interesting to think about these things and to be able to read a map and to think about that next step. That's what these tests are going to test you on, is they give you information and then they ask you to do something with it. So I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, last thing, let me click on I just want to run let me put this on the screen. Here is, okay, I can't pause it. Here is population density every year as the nation expands. Okay, I'll share this link. It's in the PowerPoint. I'll share it. You can look at it. This is year by year. It starts at the beginning in 1770, whatever. And as you can see the country expanding. Now, of course, this is American citizen population, I presume, not Native Americans, because the Native Americans were already across the country. But, so I don't know exactly what information we're working with, but you can see population density. We can see now those cities start to form. Look at New York City, look at Boston, look at Michigan. You can see your county in Pennsylvania change colors as population density goes up. Okay, so I came across this and I just thought it was pretty cool. You can see the growth of the country over time. And we talked about Manifest Destiny. You can see the country sweeping across to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, I think that's pretty cool. You can see now California getting darker and darker, those bigger California cities, Texas, big cities. The
I just want to,
Northeast. Yeah.
I just want to say, Mr. Matt, that the way this is looking right now, the way this is increasing, this might not have anything to do with it, but I'm going to say anyway that this is similar to how the cases and the deaths rise and increase with the coronavirus.
Right, yeah. You can take a population density map and overlay it with a lot of maps, right? So yeah, take a look at the coronavirus maps, especially, through the spring and everything. Oh, so now our map is starting over again. So population density is a big factor.
And sometimes it changes. Sometimes when it decreases, it starts disappearing.
Mm-hmm. Right, because of immunity and, when your city, when say New York City was hit extremely hard. It was terrifying in April and May.
Because you see, New York City was so big, and so is Philadelphia.
Right.
You understand that Philadelphia is not the capital city, but the biggest city in Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
And you see, New York City is the biggest city of New York. Now, sometimes when I hear New York, I want you to know that I get confused and I say, you know what? Are you talking about the state or the city? Because it said New York City. So I would rather say New York City, so that way people won't be getting so confused when they talk about New York. Oh,
Right.
so you're going to New York State? Which part of New York are you going to go to? And if they say something like, let's say, I'm going to Brooklyn, and they say, Brooklyn? Yeah, Brooklyn, New York. New York,
Right.
well, that's what it is, but I'm just saying that I get confused sometimes when I hear New York. I mean New York State or New York City.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, that happens to me too. So yeah, you can look at that. Let me go back. How can I get rid of this? Okay, so if we go back to this population density, there's a lot of other things that factor in that population density is related to. You could, a map of coronavirus cases is going to look very similar to this population density. A map of, anything. I mean, just number of grocery stores or music stores or number of a lot of things is going to look just like this population density map, because that's where the people are. And certainly the coronavirus. It's an excellent point. You can look at a coronavirus map and you can, without any other information on it, you could see where the cities are, because that's where the cases are going to be, because of the nature of viruses and people being close together and interacting with each other. If you live out in Montana and you don't see any neighbors ever, and you're a cattle farmer and you're just sitting around cows, you're not going to get sick because you're not interacting with anybody who has the virus. If you live in New York City and you walk past 5,000 people a day, just going through life, you're going to be more likely to get it. So yeah, the population density map, it's interesting that you say that, because population density is a factor. So that a map of that thing is going to look a lot like this map.
There's always a possibility to get the coronavirus if even though you're out. See, my family and I were asymptomatic, but that doesn't always mean that we can't get it again.
Yeah, that's what we're finding. Yeah. So no, it's interesting. And so that's geography. You look at those maps, and that's having geographical knowledge. So, geography is a good case in point here for the GED test and HiSET test. You don't know every map. You can't know that information. What the test is about is your skill of looking at a map, making sense of it, and then using the information they give you in the map to answer questions. Like if I gave you a map of the United States and said, here, color it in, what is this, population per square mile by state, you don't know that. I couldn't ask you to know that information. But if I give you the information, you can make sense of it by looking at the graphic, and then you can go from there. And it's a lot like that with history things too. You don't know every fact, and they don't really expect you to know every fact. They give you readings, they give you a paragraph, and then you need to make sense of it. Now, it helps to have that background knowledge. If you've never heard of Thomas Jefferson or the Declaration of Independence, you're going to have a tough time making sense of a part of the Declaration of Independence. So that's what we tried to do this month, the past 4 weeks. Give you some background information, just enough to hang that new information on so you can make sense of things. Okay. So we can wrap up here. Thanks for hanging out. Any final questions?
No,
Yeah.
thank
were you-
you, but I'm just happy to join you again.
Yeah, Nadia, thank you. So I promise this afternoon, right after lunch, I'm gonna sit down, upload this video. I'll put them on YouTube. I will send out an email. Maybe I'll send out, since you guys have all attended these things, I'll send out an email with all 4 video links of these
Awesome.
these past 4 weeks, and I'll send out this PowerPoint. I'll do it as a PDF, but you can click on the links. You can see all the stuff. It's one big thing. I think there's like 50 or 48 slides. So I just put it in there. But look at it. If you want to dig deeper in some of these topics, by all means, dig a little deeper. It's easy to Google stuff or watch a YouTube video. Things are out there. But I'll share it. I'll do it. I promise I'll do it this afternoon. And then we will continue to, I'll do this next week, but I'll start back at week 1. If you want to come, great. If not, if you want to, move on, that's absolutely fine. But that's my plan. So maybe a new class of students comes in and does the 4 weeks. That's kind of my idea. But you guys are always welcome to do things and contribute and absorb some information. So, and Marcia, I got your email there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Matt. Will you repeat all these 4 weeks? Because I just missed this week. I got a new job and I just forgot about social studies class. So how many weeks you already had when you restarted your summer?
Yeah, Nadia. So I'm doing something different. So in the past, in the spring, you and I met every week. We met and just talked about various things, right? All kinds of different topics. I'm doing something different. Now I've created, this is the 4th week, okay, of a 4-week class. So what I'm going to do is every 4 weeks, I'm going to teach these 4 classes.
Oh,
So
great.
next week, I'm going to go back to my week 1 lesson and then go from there.
Great.
The idea is that in those 4 weeks, I'm teaching you everything you need to know. I mean,
thank you. It sounds really good.
Yeah, we'll see. I'll do it a few times, and then I'll talk to students and say, well, is that good? But hopefully, yeah, within 4 weeks, we're going fast, and it's not every piece of information in the world, obviously, but it's the big things, the important things, the things you should be aware of. Because we
Thank you.
have students who, you know, don't study with us for all that long. So I kind of wanted to make just a short, fast class. You can do it in a month, and then you're ready. So it's a little different. So we're trying something new. Okay. Oh, well, let me get to my, here's my last screen. So thank you guys for 4 good weeks. I'll send out an email today with all this information. You're always welcome to email me back and let me know, or your distance learning teacher, you can always reach out to them. Okay.
Thank you so much for this class.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a
Okay.
great day, everybody.
Thank
Great
you.
afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.